We know now in hindsight that Meghan never really intended to stay. Her guest list to her wedding showed her real ambition was to be a star in California, and Harry's friends were excluded from the guest list in the evening from the dinner.
The email was only 2 sentences long, sent from a journalist in London to a senior Hollywood publicist. It read, "They're real, and they're coming out." Those 7 words were enough to send phones buzzing from Buckingham Palace to Beverly Hills. No one needed to ask what they meant. For months, whispers had circulated about private recordings, alleged moments when Prince Harry spoke without the cameras, without the script, without the brand polish. Until now, they were just rumors. But this confirmation changed everything.
The future of Sussex I think, is pretty grim. I think that they're on a permanent decline. Whenever they need money, whenever they need publicity to stoke their reputation, they'll drop another little bomb. I mean, we're still waiting, of course, for Meghan's own autobiography, which I'm sure she is penning. She is a good writer, and it'll be filled with vitriol and filled with lies. I mean, she will not tell the truth because she wants sensational headlines. That is the ultimate weapon she can deploy.
Within minutes, insiders say Montecito turned into a war room. Staff were told to clear schedules, lawyers were allegedly looped in on emergency calls, and somewhere across the Atlantic, Tom Bower, the biographer whose name alone can make royals sweat, was preparing to push publish. Bower isn't a gossip columnist looking for clicks. He's a strategist who dismantles reputations with precision. And according to industry sources, he'd been sitting on these recordings for months, waiting for a moment when Harry and Meghan's brand pivot was mid-flight. The tapes, insiders claim, weren't clumsy hot mic accidents. They were conversations where Harry spoke freely, venting frustrations about media deals, making unflattering remarks about family members, and even critiquing Meghan's approach to certain partnerships. Nothing about them was public-friendly. For a couple who'd built an empire on controlled vulnerability, the idea of these words hitting the open market wasn't just bad timing, it was lethal. But the most revealing moment came before a single clip was released. As word of the tapes spread, allies who had once been quick to defend Harry suddenly went silent. Not one issued a preemptive statement of support. Not one hinted that the recordings were fake.
A lot of people accuse Meghan of changing Harry, but do you think this is the real Harry?
No, I don't. I think that it's just Harry, being a simple soul, has easily changed to suit Meghan's agenda. And Meghan's living with Meghan is very different than living with Kate and William. Meghan has a completely different attitude, and I think California has a different attitude. So I think we're now seeing a different Harry.
Reports suggest even longtime media partners quietly stepped back, declining to get involved, and that, insiders say, was the first real sign of trouble. "If your friends won't stand up for you before they've even heard the audio," one Hollywood executive said, "they probably already know what's on it." By the time Bower's release went live, the Sussex PR machine wasn't preparing counterattacks, it was bracing for impact. And the damage that followed would prove impossible to spin.
When Meghan came along into the scene, I just thought, this is fascinating. How is this going to play out? To tell the truth, I spoke to very few friends of Meghan because she put a fatwa on anyone talking to me who she could. So I sent off dozens and dozens of emails to her friends, and most of them didn't even reply. And obviously I spoke to her father, who loves her still very much, and said, in the end, whatever she is, she's still my daughter.
When the first clip landed online, it wasn't accompanied by screaming tabloid headlines or flashing exclusive banners. It appeared quietly, a 32-second audio file buried in a late-night post from an account that insiders say has been a leak channel for high-profile scandals before. Within an hour, it had been reposted to 3 other platforms. By morning, it was everywhere, and the voice? Unmistakable. Calm at first, then sharper, allegedly complaining that certain media partners hadn't done enough to protect his image. According to reports, Harry's tone wasn't pained or vulnerable. It was cutting, even mocking. "It sounded like a man who thought he was untouchable," one industry insider told us. And now we were all hearing why.
Alternatively, charming, spoiled, badly educated, simple-minded and demanding, and that previous girlfriend said he lacked class, was unromantic, unserious, short-tempered, imperious. What on earth did Meghan see in that then?
She saw someone who's needy. She saw somebody
she could fix.
Who she could use and who could serve her purposes. And to be fair, I think Harry saw the same in her. He was looking for someone who, despite all those minuses, wanted him, and she did want him because because she then was promoted from an unknown actress into a global star. So they served each other.
Insiders claim the audio quickly spread to Hollywood's top decision makers. Streaming executives who had quietly tolerated Harry's unpredictability were now listening to what sounded like direct confirmation of their worst fears, a brand built on curated sympathy, but privately driven by control and resentment. When you make money off being relatable, you can't afford to sound entitled in private, a former studio partner said. Reports suggest that within 24 hours, at least one major deal tied to the Sussex brand was put on hold, not canceled outright, just paused, with contractual reassessment quietly noted in internal memos. The royal connection, once a novelty, had suddenly become a legal risk.
I think he slipped from what was the natural person who everyone in Britain loved and saw the smiley person who played with children, Ursula Bolt and the whole thing, into this vengeful person, full of vengeance. I think Meghan encouraged the vengeance. Meghan encouraged the anger and the hatred and seeing enemies and paranoia.
Meanwhile, the royal sphere was processing its own shock. Sources close to palace aides claim that while Buckingham Palace had already cut emotional ties with Harry, the tapes confirmed every private warning they'd ever given. There was no official statement. There didn't need to be. In royal protocol, silence isn't just a refusal to engage, it's an erasure. When they ignore you completely, one former staffer said, you're not a threat anymore. You're irrelevant. But for Harry, irrelevance wasn't the issue. The real problem was that for the first time, he couldn't point to the British press as the villain. There was no tabloid middleman, no spin, just his own voice, speaking for itself.
Discovered was, of course, that she was hunting for a man in England from 2013 onwards, when her marriage had crashed and she couldn't find anyone in Canada at the time. And she wanted wealth and she wanted fame. And she targeted, there's no doubt she targeted her.
What made the situation even more volatile was Meghan's absence from the unfolding drama. Industry observers noticed immediately. No joint statement, no public show of solidarity. According to entertainment insiders, Meghan's team was already redirecting her upcoming projects to spotlight her individually, removing couple branding wherever possible. Whether she'd known about the tapes beforehand remains unclear, but her silence was strategic. You can't save someone from their own words, one PR veteran said. You can only decide whether to get burned with them. For Harry, that decision seemed to have already been made. The second tape didn't trickle out. It exploded. A full 3 minutes of audio, reportedly recorded during what sources describe as a private strategy conversation, landed on multiple platforms within minutes. This time, there was no mistaking the tone. Sharper, impatient, and, according to one insider who's heard the full version, utterly dismissive of anyone who questioned him. In the clip, Harry allegedly referred to certain royal staff members as pathetic and small-minded, mocking their attempts to rein in his public statements. Even more damaging, reports suggest he laughed off the idea of long-term reconciliation with his family, calling it PR fantasy. But it was what came next that rattled his Hollywood relationships. The tape allegedly captured him discussing the value of public sympathy as a business tool. The trauma is the brand, he reportedly said, a phrase that insiders claim sent chills through former partners who had championed his mental health advocacy. For companies who had aligned with Harry to promote emotional honesty and resilience, this wasn't just an off-message slip, it was brand sabotage. If people think you're monetizing your pain, it stops being authentic, a veteran producer explained. And when authenticity goes, so does the audience. Behind closed doors in Montecito, insiders say the atmosphere was pure chaos. Harry allegedly reacted not with damage control, but with rage, shouting at advisors, demanding to know who had access to the recordings, and threatening legal action against anyone even suspected of involvement. Sources claim he canceled at least 2 scheduled appearances, insisting that he needed to protect the brand before facing the public. But the problem was that the brand, the careful narrative of a wounded prince rising above, had already been dismantled in the public eye. Every hour the tape circulated, the gap between that public persona and his private tone widened. The third and most devastating tape reportedly leaked just 48 hours later. This one, according to multiple accounts, included subtle but unmistakable digs at Meghan herself, questioning the effectiveness of certain partnerships she'd pursued and expressing frustration over how some joint ventures had been handled. While the remarks weren't overtly cruel, they were enough to spark speculation that the United Sussex Front wasn't as unshakable as it appeared. Meghan's continued silence only fueled that narrative. PR analysts noted the shift immediately. When your partner won't publicly defend you during a crisis, the story becomes not just about the scandal, but about the relationship itself. For a couple who had spent years marketing themselves as a package deal, the silence was deafening, and the implications, insiders say, were devastating. By the end of the first week, the tapes weren't just a trending topic. They had become the defining story of Harry's post-royal life. Media outlets from Sydney to New York were dissecting every syllable, running side-by-side comparisons of his public interviews and the leaked audio. The contrast was brutal. "It's like two different people," one royal commentator told us. "The man on stage in California is all empathy and reflection. The man on those tapes is sharp, entitled, and transactional." Hollywood, once the couple's golden safety net, began pulling back in visible ways. Sources inside a major streaming service say that a high-profile Sussex project, already in late-stage negotiations, was quietly deprioritized after the second tape surfaced. In branding terms, that's corporate code for "it's not worth the risk." Event organizers reportedly started rethinking speaking invitations, worried about being linked to what one industry insider bluntly called a brand in freefall. Even charitable partners hesitated, with at least two high-profile organizations allegedly pausing collaborative campaigns pending internal review. Royal circles didn't gloat, at least not publicly, but insiders claim the palace saw the tapes as confirmation of their decision to sever ties long ago. There was no outreach, no attempt to mediate, just an unspoken consensus that Harry had crossed a point of no return. "Once you're no longer an asset, you're simply not part of the equation," a former royal aide said. For Harry, that meant not just losing influence in the UK, but also losing the one thing that had always given him leverage in Hollywood, the mystique of still being a royal outsider. And then came the whispers about Meghan. Entertainment sources say her team had already started shifting her image from Sussex brand co-leader to independent storyteller. Internal pitch decks for upcoming projects reportedly featured only Meghan's name and likeness, a stark contrast to the couple-focused branding of the last 4 years. Insiders insist this was no coincidence. "She's building an escape hatch," one senior PR strategist claimed. "If the Harry brand implodes completely, she's ready to keep moving without being pulled down with him." Inside Montecito, the mood turned siege-like. Staff were allegedly instructed to avoid discussing the tapes altogether, even privately. Harry's legal team sent waves of cease and desist letters, but the internet had already done its work. Copies were everywhere, saved, reposted, analyzed in real time by royal watchers and body language experts. Worse, every attempt to suppress the content only seemed to boost its reach. The very act of trying to shut it down became part of the story, feeding headlines that framed Harry not as a victim of intrusion, but as a man desperate to erase the truth. And in the court of public opinion, that desperation looked a lot like guilt. In the weeks that followed, the scandal didn't fade, it calcified. The tapes became a permanent fixture in royal commentary segments, industry podcasts, and late-night monologues. For Harry, every new appearance or announcement was now filtered through the lens of those recordings. Even casual public sightings came with whispers. "That's him. That's the voice from the tapes." According to insiders, several longtime collaborators cut ties entirely, not out of anger, but out of calculation. "Once you're seen as high risk, no one's going to invest their reputation in you," a Hollywood publicist said. "It's not personal, it's business." Meghan's public trajectory only reinforced that perception. She re-emerged on social media weeks later, promoting a solo initiative with no mention of Harry. Entertainment analysts noticed the absence immediately. "It wasn't just about protecting her image," one industry observer claimed. "It was about signaling to the market that she's not part of the liability." That signal was received. Offers for Meghan continued to circulate, albeit more cautiously, while Harry's professional inquiries reportedly slowed to a trickle. Even within advocacy spaces where the couple had once been celebrated together, Meghan began appearing on guest lists alone. Inside Montecito, sources say the household shifted into quiet survival mode. Legal battles over the tape's distribution are allegedly ongoing, but with limited effect. The clips have been archived, mirrored, and embedded in commentary pieces across multiple platforms, making them virtually impossible to erase. "It's like trying to put smoke back in the bottle," one digital rights consultant explained. "Once it's out forever." Harry, who once thrived on carefully managed transparency, now faces a future where his own unfiltered words are his most damaging asset. The man who fought to control his narrative has lost the one tool he thought he could always rely on: the ability to decide what the public hears. The long-term consequences are still unfolding, but industry insiders say the damage to Harry's credibility is unlikely to reverse. Without trust from the public, partners, or even allies in the royal sphere, every future project will carry the shadow of those tapes. And with Meghan visibly shifting her brand in a solo direction, the couple's united front, once their strongest selling point, now looks fractured. Whether intentional or inevitable, the separation of their professional identities marks a new chapter neither of them had planned for. That's the reality of the modern media game. You can shape your story for years, but all it takes is one leak to strip it back to the core. And in Harry's case, that core was nothing like the image he worked so hard to project. Call to action. That's the full breakdown of how the hidden tapes turned Harry's brand inside out. Do you think the damage is permanent, or can he recover? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit the like button if this story shocked you, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive into Hollywood's biggest power shifts, starting with Meghan Markle's alleged behind-the-scenes feud that's making waves in elite circles.